Today, we shall be discussing about the reserve capital and the capital reserve. Both these terms seem to have the same meaning, but they are totally different. See, reserve capital is basically a type of capital, and the capital reserve is a type of reserve. So the second word in both these statements show the true nature of what these words are. I repeat, reserve capital is a capital which is of reserve nature, and capital reserve is a reserve which is of capital nature. Let's study in detail. See, now this is a company, joint stock company. It sells off at some point of time. It sells, say, capital items, land, building, and machinery. Now it gains from selling these items. So what will be that called? That is called the capital profit. Now when a company makes capital profit by selling any of these items, this part of capital profit is kept as a reserve. Now, what generally you do is, whenever you earn profit, you either plow back in the company itself or you make fun out of it. You can spend it elsewhere, anywhere you want. But in this type of capital profit, which the company will be earning by selling the capital items, it will be keeping a part of that capital profit as a reserve. It will not be using it for any of its expenditure. So that reserve is called capital reserve. A reserve which is of capital nature, which you have created out of capital profit. Now the next is the reserve capital. Now you are well aware of the authorized share capital, right? Now the company does not keep on calling all of its share capital. Some of the share capital which is uncalled from the public is called reserve capital. That type of capital, that type of uncalled share capital, which is a part of your authorized share capital, will not be called from the public. It is not called. That is kept as a reserve. This is called reserve capital. See, now we come to the terminology. Reserve capital is a part of authorized share capital that a company resolves, the company plans not to call. It hasn't called that share capital. It has kept it as a reserve in the event of winding up of the company. Okay. We don't want the company to be wind up, but for future planning, if something goes wrong, God forbid, something happens like the liquidation of the company, in that case, we will be calling up that reserve capital. Now, the creation of reserve capital is totally voluntary. It is not at all compulsory on the company to maintain such type of reserve capital. If the company thinks so, it can create this reserve capital. Now coming over to capital reserve, I told you it is a reserve which is created out of capital profits and it is not free for distribution as dividend. The company cannot declare the dividend out of this capital reserve. The reserve which the company creates out of the capital profits. Capital profits mainly selling out of land, building, just as I told you. That reserve cannot be used to distribute as dividend. Okay. Now it is a part of profit. Definitely. It is a part of capital profit. Okay. Supposing that the company sold a machinery and made a profit out of it. This type is capital profit, just as I told you. Now capital reserve will be created out of this capital profit. A part of that capital profit will be shifted to capital reserve. Why do you keep it? Why do you maintain such type of reserve? To meet long-term capital expense for the future. You know, you just keep your earnings little by little, like a small baby or a small child. He must be having a piggy bank and keeping the money there in stock to meet, say, to buy a jacket or to buy a cycle or anything like this, right? So similarly, the company also keeps them aside to meet long-term capital expenses for the future. Now, it is not allowed. You cannot distribute it as dividend to the shareholders. This capital reserve will not be used as a dividend. Now, see further, it is mandatory for every company to create such reserves to meet future expenses, long-term future expenses. For that reason, it is mandatory. You have to maintain this capital reserve. Share premium is such type of capital reserve, to quote an example, and capital redemption reserve is also an example of capital reserve. Now, coming over to the differences, first point highlights the meaning. Reserve capital is that part of uncalled capital which cannot be called except in the event of winding up. And capital reserve is that part of reserve which is not free for distribution as dividend, right? Now, I would like to repeat that reserve capital is basically a capital. The second term denotes the true meaning of this word. And capital reserve is basically a reserve which is second term denoting the true meaning of this whole term. Now, this capital is a reserve type of capital, and this reserve is a capital type of reserve. Next is the creation. Reserve capital is called an uncalled capital. Okay, this is how it is created. It a part of capital which is not called is called reserve capital. And capital reserve is very well created out of the capital gains, out of the capital profits. Now, as far as optional or mandatory is concerned, reserve capital not at all mandatory to have reserve capital. If the company wants, it can make calls for the uncalled capital and just call it very well in advance, not waiting for the winding up of the company, not mandatory for the company to maintain reserve capital. But as far as this capital reserve is concerned, it is mandatory. It is compulsory for them to create such type of capital reserves. If they earn capital profits, only then they will be maintaining these type of capital reserves. Now, the special resolution is very well required for reserve capital, and no such special resolution is required to maintain capital reserve. Next point is, when will you use these terms? Reserve capital, it will be used, it will be called up at the time of winding up or the liquidation of the company. And capital reserve, it can be used in the lifetime of a company. It is that part of profit which you have kept aside, which you will not be using as dividend. And in future, you want to see some capital expenses come up, you can very well use them, not a problem. Next is the writing of capital losses. Reserve capital is never used to write off capital losses. It can't be, it can never be. But capital reserve, can be very well used to write off capital losses. The main purpose of creating this capital reserve is just to keep it safe to meet capital losses in future. Next is the disclosure point. Reserve capital is not disclosed. It is not shown in the company's balance sheet. But the capital reserve, it is disclosed. It is very well shown in the balance sheet under the head reserve and surplus on the equity and liability part of the balance sheet. So here we come to the end of the article. I hope I have made the things very clear to you. In case you have any doubts, please feel free to ask me in the comment section. In case you have any suggestions, do come ahead. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay blessed.